Shalom, everyone. Today we're going to begin with an advanced introduction into HaSfiroth. But before we begin, we need a brief introduction into our most famous disciples, which are the Greeks, or ancient Greeks for that matter. We read in the book of Genesis, chapter 9, verse 18, it is written, Elohim shall enlarge Japheth, who happens to be the progenitor of the Greek race, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, who happens to be the progenitor of the Hebrew race, and many of the Middle Eastern, people. And so, what this ancient holy oracle is telling us is that the sons of Japheth, which would include the Greeks and the Romans, etc., basically were to dwell in the tents of Shem, which expressionistically signifies that their knowledge, their wisdom, their theosophies would be rooted and sourced in the theosophy, knowledge, and wisdom of Shem. And we know that the ancient Greeks traveled, for the most part, towards the Middle East, to Chaldea, Syria, Israel, Egypt, and that they basically studied under many of the masters in the mystery schools in the Middle East. And so this is why, if you were to master the ancient Greek theologies and philosophies, you would see how deeply rooted they are in ancient Middle Eastern theology, specifically our Hebrew, ancient Hebrew theosophy that goes back all the way to Abraham, stemming from Chaldea. And so this is very, very critical and important to understand, because when you become fully initiated into the holy mysteries and you master the Kabbalah and you also master ancient Greek thought and philosophy as well, you will then be able to see all of the equations and links between both of them. And so part of this equation also extends to the languages as well. So the Greek language is rooted and has a source in the ancient Chaldaic language. And if you knew both languages or were fluent in both of them, or one was fluent in both of them, you could readily see that. In fact, the most esteemed ancient historians, as recorded by Eusebius, explicitly state that the Greek language is rooted and sourced in the ancient Chaldaic language. And there are many proofs for this, and the proofs, unfortunately, are beyond the time and space that has been allotted for this video. But here I provide a couple of examples in this slide. So beginning with the word Sfiroth, what does the word Sfiroth mean? Well, in Hebrew, it is a very polysemous language, and the word Sfiroth, as a result, has many meanings. It stems from a root word, which is the root word would be the word Sefer, which is in Hebrew spelled Samech Pei Resh. And one of the primary meanings of the word Sfiroth would be spheres. And below that, you can see the Greek word for sphere, which is sphera, and you can see how the consonants match both. So this is one example of how Greek and Hebrew are related. And so what are these spheres? Well, when we speak of the Sfiroth, we are speaking of the divine spheres. And this is why in the most ancient diagrams of the Sfiroth, you would see concentric circles, because circles represent spheres, or may represent spheres. So these are the divine spheres within the Godhead. That's what primarily the Sfiroth are in reference to. Now below that, you can see another Greek word, trech, or trichos, which means to run or a path. And then you see the word in the Hebrew, which is derech, which also means path. And you can see how trech and derech, both the Hebrew and Greek, are phonetically very, very similar. The letter T and D are sometimes interchangeable due to the fact that they are phonetically they may be very similar. So now the word Sfiroth, as it is written in Hebrew and in many Kabbalistic texts, is only found in one place in the entire ancient Holy Scriptures, and that is in the book of Psalms, chapter 71, verse 15, where it states, "My mouth shall show forth thy righteousness and thy salvation all day, for I know not the Sfiroth." Now, clearly, King David is not saying that he's not acquainted with the holy divine spheres, because he is a major prophet and extremely initiated Kabbalist at that. So he's clearly not saying that. So he's using ancient Hebrew idioms and expressionistic language to basically state that the Sfiroth, or the divine spheres, are very transcendental concepts and ideas. And as such, it's very hard for our corporeal reality to ascertain these very incorporeal and transcendental natures. That's really what he's trying to say expressionistically here, at least on the literal level. Well, at least on the mystical level, at least at the mystical level. On the literal level, the word Sfiroth may also mean may refer to the scribal art. And so what he's then saying here on the literal level is that, King David was not a scribe. The scribes dedicated their entire lives to studying the art and science of the scribal art, because it's a very lifelong pursuit, to say the least. And so he definitely was not a scribe. And so because he was not a scribe and he was not fully initiated, into the lifetime study that becoming a scribe entails, he then says, well, since I'm not fully initiated into the scribal art, the least that I can do is show forth thy righteousness and thy salvation all day with my mouth. So on the literal level, this is what he's saying in the verse. But on a more mystical level, he's really saying that, the Sfiroth are such transcendental concepts and ideas that it's very hard for the human mind to fully know them. We can only relate to them through symbols and analogies and metaphors, etc. Because to have a full 100% knowledge of these divine spheres is clearly impossible given our corporeal restraints. Now, moving on, we do find the root word of the Sfiroth does appear many other times throughout the ancient Hebrew scriptures, and there are a few times where it does mystically allude to the Sfiroth. One such example is in the book of Psalms, chapter 19, verse 1, where it states, "The heavens declare the glory of Elohim." Now, here you can see that the word Sfiroth or Sefer also can signify declaration or declaring or saying. And so this is another level of meaning to this word. And so here we have a relationship between something very, very divine, which is the heavens, and this root word that forms the basis of the word Sfiroth. So here we sort of have a mystical equation between these divine spheres and the heavens. So this is a very, very mystical verse. And unfortunately, we don't have the full time and space to fully get into it. Now, the next verse, which is sort of operating on the same mystical level, is found in the book of Exodus, chapter 24, verse 10, where it states, "And they saw the gods of Israel, and under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire." So another level of meaning to the word Sfiroth is sapphire or sapphires. And so again, here we have a link between the Godhead or the divine spheres and sapphire, because here this verse is describing Israel seeing the full Godhead. And then below the Godhead, it sees some sort of structure made of sapphires. So it's essentially equating sapphire or sapphires with the Godhead. So again, this is a very, very telistic verse in the Holy Scriptures. And so the last verse coupled with this verse are very Kabbalistic and very telistic verses, and much more can be said about them. But again, we are only at the moment I can only briefly touch upon the telistic nature of these verses, but much more will be said in ensuing videos. Now, the next point is that we find in the account of creation, we find this statement in the Hebrew would be Wayomer Elohim, which means and Elohim said. We find that this statement occurs 10 times in the account of creation. Now, we must understand that there's nothing trivial about any aspect of the Holy Word. Not even the most minute aspect of the Holy Word is trivial in nature. In other words, every aspect, even the most minute aspect of the Holy Word, contains innumerable mysteries and secrets. And so, with that said, we must understand that there is a profound mystery behind why this statement occurs 10 times in the account of creation. We must ask, why not 3 times? Why not 15 times? The Holy Word is very specific, and it's very, very specific, and there's a reason, a divine reason, why this statement only occurs 10 times. And the reason is because we find that what the statement is really saying is that and the gods said. So we find that this statement and the gods said is occurring 10 times. And this is a very mystical allusion to the truth, the hidden truth, that there are, in essence, 10 gods being referenced in the account of creation. The reason it occurs 10 times is because there are 10 such gods. Because the word Elohim is plural. It's saying, and the gods said. And so, who are these gods? Well, one way of answering the question is by repeating the phrase 10 times to indicate that there are 10 such Elohim. And this is why we find written in our most ancient esoteric text, Sefer Yetzirah, or the Book of Formation, in chapter 1, verse 4, it states, there are 10 Sfiroth of Nothingness, 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11. Again, the Torah is very, very precise, very exact, and very specific. Now, moving on to another verse in the same book, we find that it also states that he created the universe with 3 Sephirim, with Sefer, which is text, with Sipar, which is number, with Sipur, which is speech. Now, again, we are given more levels of meaning to this word Sfiroth, because it can also mean text. So the root word Sefer usually means a scroll. So the way to say scroll in Hebrew is Sefer, and that a Sefer is nothing more than text. So that's one level of meaning. Another one is Sipar, which is number, and another one is a speech. And so we see that these spheres, these divine spheres, are also equated with numbers, text, and speech. Because we have, in the account of creation, 10 gods. There are 10 Sfiroth, 10 divine spheres. This is where number comes into play. These are 10 numbers, essentially, or 10 ideas. And we find that they are speaking into existence, creation. And so we find that the medium of creation is speech. And speech is comprised of text. And so we should now begin to comprehend how everything is interconnected in the supernal domain, in the holy domain. You can think of the Holy Torah as one large, beautiful tapestry with numerous threads weaving in and out. This is one symbolic and mystical way of visualizing this divine Torah, this divine law. Everything is interconnected, and it's done in a very, very beautiful manner. Now, moving on, we proceed with the first verse in the Torah, which is Bereshit bara Elohim, which signifies in the beginning the gods created. Remember, the word Elohim is plural. This must not be forgotten on the reader. Now, this is the first level of interpretation. On the most literal level, this is what the verse is saying. Now, there is something weird going on in this statement, in the sense that the subject here is plural, that is Elohim, and the verb to create is conjugated in the singular when we would normally expect it to be in the plural. So we are finding that the grammatical rules of Hebrew are being broken, because we should expect a plural conjugation of the subject, but we are given a singular conjugation. This is done purposefully by the divine scribe to mystically indicate the Godhead being equated with singularity and plurality. In other words, within the Godhead, singularity is equated with plurality. So they're both equal. So the Godhead is simultaneously singular and plural. And this, again, is a supernal paradox that only holy initiates can understand. Only those who are initiated into the holy mysteries can begin to understand the supernal paradoxes, because we must understand that as part of the laws that govern the holy domain of Elohim, that it is abound with supernal antinomies and paradoxes. And when a holy adept or initiate is being initiated into the holy mysteries, his mind then expands to be able to attempt to begin to understand these supernal paradoxes, not as contradictions, but as supernal truths. And so, with that said, we also within the holy mysteries, we have our own esoteric codified system of exegesis. And this codified system of exegesis is very, very thorough, and was handed down to us by gods who walked in the flesh thousands of years ago, and ancient sages like Moshe. And while I don't have the full time and space to fully reveal and teach these esoteric codified system of proper veracious exegesis of the Holy Scriptures, what can be said is that one such method is to read a verse hyperliterally in order to extract the much deeper levels of interpretation, the more mystical and esoteric levels of interpretation. And so in ancient Hebrew grammar, we find that in a normal sentence, the verb must come first, followed by the subject. So this is what we find in the verse here, as expected. The verb to create comes first, which is bara, followed by Elohim, which is the subject. And when it's read, as it would be read by a Hebrew layperson, he would understand that as to read, in the beginning, the gods created. But we Kabbalists are going to read the verse now hyperliterally. And if we read it hyperliterally, it then reads as, in the beginning, he created Elohim, or the gods. And so now we arrive at the seventh level of interpretation, which is the most esoteric and the most mystical. And so what we have here is we have two accounts of creation being given. One is exoteric or revealed, and the other one is hidden or esoteric. And this is the great secret behind the first word of the Torah, which is Breyshith. If you were to have a proper Holy Torah scroll, you would find that the first letter of the Torah is the letter Beth. And it is very special in the sense that in an actual Holy Torah scroll, the letter Beth is enlarged. And so the letter Beth would be enlarged and bigger visually than all the other letters surrounding it. And again, this is a mystical indicator within the Torah scroll, indicating a mystery. What is the mystery? What is it trying to indicate? Well, on one level, it is telling us to, or the holy reader, to separate this letter from the rest of the word, so that we then get two parts or two words. The first one being the letter Beth, and then the rest of the word of Breyshith, which is Reshith. And when you do that, you then get a compound word, which is Beth Reshith. Now, the letter Beth has a gematria of 2, and the Hebrew word Reshith signifies beginning. Thus, when we read it out, it would read to beginning or to beginnings. In other words, there are two beginnings. There is an exoteric beginning and an esoteric beginning. The exoteric beginning is the literal interpretation, or the first level of interpretation, which is in the beginning, the gods created the heavens and the earth, etc. But the esoteric interpretation or level would then be, in the beginning, he created the Elohim. And these are just some of the many mysteries and secrets of just the first verse of the Torah. And there are so many more. But again, we don't have the time and space to go into the many other mysteries and secrets that are contained just within the first 3 words of the Torah. But again, we will elaborate and speak more on this in future videos. Now, moving on, we move on to the very holy word Elohim in Hebrew, which signifies the gods. Now, this word, in essence, forms the cornerstone and foundation of the holy mysteries, or the esoteric Kabbalah. Now, when we permute the letters of this word, we can permute them in such a way that we form 3 words, which in Hebrew would read Haim, Yoth, El, which signifies they, the 10, are God, because the letter Yod has a gematria of 10. And so what we find is that the word Elohim inherently contains the knowledge of the holy Decad, or the Sfiroth, or the Godhead. Moving on to the word Breyshith, which means in the beginning, we may also permute the letters of this word to form 3 words, which in Hebrew would read Breyshith Yod. And this signifies he created the foundation, which is the 10. Now, the letter Yoth, as it would be pronounced in very, very ancient Hebrew, also signifies beginning. So there is an equation between the number 10 and beginning, because in essence, the Sfiroth, or the Godhead, is the beginning. Going back to the first verse of the Torah, where it says, in the beginning he created the gods, this is a very, very esoteric mystical interpretation, because we have to ask ourselves, who is he that is being spoken of here? Not only do we have not only are we speaking of the Godhead or the gods, but now we have an extra entity here known as he, that is separate and above this Godhead. Who is he? He is who we who are initiated call Ein Sof, which in Hebrew signifies the infinite one. And he is the true power behind the throne. He is the entity that emanated or gave birth to the actual Godhead. He is infinite. He is transcendental and ineffable in nature. He is so ineffable, so transcendental, so incorporeal, that there's no possible way that we can know anything about him, and we are not even allowed to speak on him, not because we are not allowed, but because we are so restricted and restrained within this corporeal matter that it does not allow us to ascertain or reach such a transcendental and ineffable level as such that Ein Sof resides upon. And so for that reason, this is one of our most esoteric and mystical doctrines within the Kabbalah, which is the knowledge and wisdom of the one true God, who is Ein Sof. And so it is he who gave birth to the Sfiroth, or the holy Decad, to act as an intermediary between him and the rest of creation, which cannot access him. And so this is one of the greatest secrets of the purpose and existence of this Godhead, or this holy Decad. Essentially, it is to act as an intermediary between Ein Sof and the rest of creation. And this is very momentous to comprehend. Now we move on to a few parables contained within the Holy Scriptures that allude to this holy Decad. We find in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 33, verse 2, it states, he shone forth from Mount Pharan with a myriad of holy ones. Now here we have he shone forth being made in reference to the actual Godhead. So here it is speaking of the actual emanative process of, the Godhead. So he shone forth, or he emanated forth from Mount Pharan. In this case, we can say Mount Pharan represents Ein Sof, and he shone forth represents the emanative process of the actual Sfiroth, or Godhead. And it's with a myriad of holy ones. Here we have a myriad, which mathematically is defined as 10,000. So this number contains the number 10. So here we find the actual number 10. So it's a very encoded parable, clearly alluding to the emanative process from Ein Sof to the Godhead to the actual 10 emanations within the Godhead. The next parable is found in the book of Exodus, chapter 26, verse 1, where it states, "Ye shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains." Here, the 10 curtains represent the 10 emanations of the actual Godhead. So the tabernacle will represent the actual Godhead in its singular unity. And so again, we have 1 equals 10, 10 equals 1. It's a supernal paradox, one that only holy adepts and holy initiates are permitted to understand or even begin to grasp. Now we move on to the holiest name above all names, which is the Holy Tetragrammaton, which is comprised of 4 letters. And it is interesting to note that the sum of the numbers 1 through 4 inclusive is 10. That is 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. Now, this is very important because this indicates and signifies that the Tetragrammaton, which is comprised of 4 letters, inherently contains the knowledge of the Holy Decad. It is essentially acting as a potentiality to the number 10, because 4 is the potentiality of the number 10, which is the actuality. Now, if you were to fully spell out each letter of the Tetragrammaton, that is Yoth Hey Waw Hey, you would get, the first letter is Yod, which spelled out would be 3 letters, and the second letter Hey would be 2 letters, and etc. And when you add up all those letters, it would be 10 holy letters. Again, this is another secondary proof within the Tetragrammaton, reinforcing its inherent potentiality of the number 10, or the Holy Decad. Now, we move back to the word Elohim, and we must understand that, again, as I stated previously, the word Elohim is plural, and plurality, in essence, when it is reduced to its lowest form, this form is binary in nature, or representative of the number 2. And so, in essence, we may say that the word Elohim is alluding to some binary aspect. We understand this binary aspect to be male and female, or an entity and its opposing entity. And so we find that in the book of Genesis, in chapter 1, verse 26, it states, "Elohim created Adam in his image, male and female he created them." Now, we need to analyze this verse in order to plumb some of its more profound telistic depths. When we do so, we see that Adam is both male and female. And duly note that it states he created them in reference to Adam, and not he created him, thus equating Adam with plurality. And so from this verse, we learn that this image, which is Adam, is 1, simultaneously both male and female, 2, as a result, plural. And so it then logically follows that if the image is plural and male and female, then the archetype, Elohim, must also be plural and male and female. But we already know it's plural. But what we are giving here is further information on its essence, namely that it is male and female. Ergo, we now have the proof for the female deity within the Godhead. And so what has been just revealed are extremely momentous and profound esoteric concepts, knowledge, and wisdom here. And it is also interesting to note that the Gematria of the Tetragrammaton is 26. And it is more than interesting that it is the 26th verse of the Torah that contains the quintessence of Elohim, or the Godhead. Now, we move on to some of the arcana contained within the Tetragrammaton, as we've already exposed at least one. Now, when we read the Tetragrammaton backwards in Hebrew, it forms a compound word, which is he, she. In Hebrew, it would read hu, which phonetically signifies in Hebrew he, and then he, which phonetically in Hebrew signifies she. So it's a he, she. Essentially, when the Tetragrammaton is read backwards, it's indicating that it is a hermaphrodite entity, just like its image, Adam. Now, we must proceed in explicating a most momentous concept within the Kabbalah, and it falls under the domain of Gematria and what I would call esoteric branches of mathematics. Now, im kolal in Hebrew signifies with the sum, and it is in reference to a very special supernal equation, which is x equals x plus 1, which, again, is another supernatural or supernal paradox, because this equation reduces to a contradiction, namely 0 equals 1. But again, in the supernal domain, which is abound with antinomies and paradoxes, this is of no concern. So, needless to say, it is important to understand that within the supernal domain, this is a supernal paradox, but it is nonetheless a supernal truth, and it must be treated as such. And so, with it, we are able to, through this supernal equation, we are able to equate the number 9 with 10, which is of great significance, as will be seen shortly. Now, another arcanum contained within the Tetragrammaton is the revelation and understanding of what these letters or signs or symbols of the Tetragrammaton represent. And essentially, the first letter, Yod, represents the Holy Father within the Godhead. And the first Hey represents the Holy Mother within the Godhead. And the letter Hey is a feminine letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And it's important to understand that you can think of Hebrew as Hebrew is a language that is very similar to the Romance languages, and it contains it is comprised of masculine and feminine parts. It does not contain the neuter like some of the Germanic languages do. It is more akin to the Romance languages. There's male and female words, letters, etc. And the letter Hey in the Hebrew language is denoted as a feminine marker. For as a suffix, it basically feminizes words. So if a word ends in the letter Hey, then that's how one knows that this word is feminine. Moving on, the letter Vav represents the Holy Son within the Godhead, and the second Hey represents the Holy Daughter within the Godhead. Now, expanding upon this revelation, the Yod is the first emanation. It represents the first emanation of the Holy Decad. And the first Hey represents the second emanation within the Holy Decad. And the letter Vav has a gematria of 6, which therefore means that it would represent the next 6 emanations. And the second Hey represents the last emanation. So we arrive at a total of 9 emanations, which are equated with 10 im kolel. Now, we must understand to fully understand the Godhead, we must fully understand it as the supernal holy archetypal family. It is the archetypal family to all holy families here on earth. And as I've just related, we find this knowledge and wisdom contained in the Holy Torah through parable and allegory. So we find in the Torah that Israel, which loosely may mean Prince of God, he represents the upper God within the Godhead, which is the Holy Father. And he is married to Leah, which would then represent the female deity, which is the Holy Mother. And he emanates 6 divine sons with her, which represent the 6 divine emanations within the Godhead. And then he has one daughter who is Dinah, who symbolizes the only begotten divine daughter within the Godhead. Again, you have a total of 7 male emanations plus 2 female for a total of 9, which im kolel becomes 10. And so you can see how when you decode all of the symbols within the Holy Scriptures, you can then begin to ascertain and ascend higher levels of understanding and revelation of supernal knowledge and wisdom.